This is going to be a very different sort of video to any I've done before, and I'll say early doors, if it's not your cup of tea, no offence is taken at all if you just switch off, and if this only gets 3 views, then so be it. But recently, my friend Mick Backpedaler, made a great video of his kind of cycling history and development over the years, and I thought it'd be interesting for me to do the same, but I really don't have enough data to tell an interesting story. But what I do want to show on this channel at some point is the most interesting bicycle adventure I've ever been on, which is my trip to Thailand with my dad back in 2019. But when I found myself trying to make that video, I kept coming back to like things that have happened with me and bikes when I've been growing up. Like, oh, this is relevant because in 2012 I was my university cycling team captain. And it was making the video so hard that I thought maybe what would be better is if I just tell the story of my cycling history, and then it's done and I don't have to refer to it at all, and if people aren't interested, that's fine. So what I'm going to do here is show you some footage just of some nice roads near the steps and Nantafrith that I rode recently. They're not really video worthy in their own right, but I'll talk over them and tell this story, and that way, if you want to just put the roads on and mute me if you're on the turbo trainer, that's fine. If you want to just listen to me and not watch the roads like a podcast, that's fine too. But this is, in short, the story of how I became a cyclist. Riding bikes has just always been a thing I've done and my family have done. We always used to go out together, just like along the front in Wirral, along the seafront and stuff. But it was probably when I was 14 that I expressed an interest in doing it like as its own activity, not just we're going out for the day and taking bikes. And the thing that got me interested in it is there's a charity bike ride every year that goes from Liverpool to Chester and back, so they're like 2 nearby cities. The reason I was interested, the only reason, is because you got to cycle through the Mersey Tunnel, which is normally car traffic only, so I thought it'd be really cool to ride my bike through there, and to be frank, doing a 50-mile bike ride, bragging rights when you're 14 maybe, I thought that'd be fun. So although my mum is now a very good road cyclist, at the time I don't think she'd have considered herself a road cyclist at all, and this request was remit of my dad, who had raced in his youth and always ridden bikes in and around childcare and the like. He said, before we do that, we need to go on some longer rides. We can't just have done 3 miles on your heavy hybrid bike. So we did some tester rides, and one that's of particular interest, I'll show you a photo of, is the first time I ever cycled to Wales from my house. I just remember being knackered and us stopping on the bridge, and it was like, wow, we're in Wales, that's fantastic. Also at the time, like some family friends, they had a son my age, we were friends, and he was getting into it, so I thought it'd be cool to ride together. He was much better than me then. I've alluded to the fact that I was a late bloomer, so even though I was 14, I had the body of a 7-year-old. Anyway, we did this ride, and those family friends did much better than me. I was knackered. My dad pushed me. I think he pushed me the entire way from Chester back to Liverpool. Thank you very much, Father. And from there, I just gradually got more into it, to be honest. We would go out more often together. I had a friend at school who was part of a local cycling club. He said, oh, you should come out for a ride. We took another mate. We went out to Llandegla Mountain Bike Centre, which was a good length ride at the time. And he seemed surprised and disappointed that I didn't blow up on the way home. I was like, yeah, this is an okay length. So around the age of 17, 18, I got into riding with a local cycling club, Birkenhead North End, CC. There was a great subset of cycling there run by a guy called Steve Light, who would come out in his car and he would look after us, and it was aimed at juniors and it was aimed at developing us. I wouldn't actually endorse the club as a wider thing. They were quite cliquey and not very welcoming, but on Lighty's rides, and with Carol and Keith Boardman, Chris's parents, Carol much missed around here, and people like Barry and Chicago and Tim, they really did make a supportive atmosphere for us. And also, I was going out with my parents more often, both my mum and my dad, and although I was a moody teenager who spoke in grunts a lot of the time, I think it was quite nice for us to share that hobby. So, age of 18, then obviously is a big point of change in my life, and I'm looking at going to university. Things didn't really go to plan. I ended up spending another year at home working, resitting some exams, but, you know, met a girl, didn't really focus on cycling. problem with cycling is all your mates are 50-year-old men, right? Which now I'm 31 is okay, but when I was 18 was a problem. So I kind of stopped paying attention to my bike as much. Went to university, did take my bike with me. There was no cycling club at University of Hull, where I did my undergraduate degree. So I joined the Ultimate Frisbee team, and as many of you'll know, I got heavily into that, which we'll come back to later. But I did, with my best mate from my course, Ellis, who is the person I was visiting in my Yorkshire video, by the way, I did set up a cycling club in Hull. The problem was, you may have got the impression that I wasn't actually that great of a road cyclist. And I was by far the most experienced road cyclist in the team, so I led everything. But it was mostly dragging out relatively new riders for 40 miles, maybe, we were getting up to. Hull is pan flat, apart from one very small ridgeline called the Yorkshire Wolds. So I guess that was good for them, boring for me. It's all just agricultural flat lanes. So I wasn't particularly passionate about cycling while I was in Hull, but I did do it. And I made a friend named Chris, who I've mentioned before, who must have been a sensational hill climber a few years after we left university, because he's still top 10 on most of the climbs in the peaks, which is very impressive. I sort of packed in the bike for a couple of years, actually. But when I finished my undergraduate degree before doing my PhD, I had this long enforced summer where there was nothing I could be doing. You couldn't even justifiably say I should be revising or working or anything. I had a PhD lined up. And I rode my bike, I guess, 3 or 4 times a week with my dad. I got in good shape. I got to the point that I was regularly smashing the guys we would go out on club runs with. I was doing some crit racing around Rill in the marsh tracks. We didn't have power meters or anything. I was still reluctant to use Strava at that point, if I'm honest. But I did use Strava, and I can see that my mileage has gone up a little bit. But at the time, I sort of thought I was quite a good cyclist. But looking back on it, I was okay. You know, I was decently strong. If I had to guess for some frame of reference for you guys, I'd probably be a strong B cat on Zwift in that time. I guess maybe a low A cat. I'm not sure if that's true. Then I started my PhD. Met Rhiannon. We were both Frisbee players. I piled all of my time into one of 2 things, which was dynamic nuclear polarization or Frisbee. You'll notice that Rhiannon doesn't get a mention there, and I'm sorry. She used to constantly make a joke about how I was just never present. And in many ways, not a lot has changed. But I was either organising the local Frisbee team, captain of the local Frisbee team, etc., or I was focusing on my PhD, travelling around the world to do dynamic nuclear polarisation, NMR, which I'd love to talk about more on this channel, but I really don't think most of you are interested in magnetic resonance. So, yeah, the bike really fell by the wayside for a good few years, and in a way I regret that, but in a way I don't. I met some of my best friends who I think will be my best friends for the rest of my life in that time, all on that Frisbee team together. I love those guys, and I'm delighted with how everything worked out, but I just wish I'd kept my hand in on the bike a little bit more. One notable exception is 2016, I went on holiday to Mallorca with my family and my best mate Lloyd, and my auntie and uncle Sammy and David, who I may have mentioned are like world-class triathletes in their over 70s brackets. And that was fantastic. But really, in the final year of my PhD, all I did was write thesis. I barely exercised, I got a bit chunky, and I just wrote a book. And at the end of that time, I got a job at Unilever and I bought a house nearby. And then I was chatting to my dad one day, saying I was going to do something in Chester with a mate. And he said, "Why don't you cycle there? You've not ridden your bike in ages." And I thought, you know what? Why don't I cycle there? I've suddenly got all this free time in which I was writing a book previously. And I rode down and I realised how much I'd missed it. So I said to my parents, it'd be great if we went cycling around where Rhiannon grew up. We'd go out for the day and we'd just do a little ride. And we did. And my dad absolutely smashed me up Stull and Dam. That was the first time I'd ever cycled it. And I vowed on that day to never lose to the old man again. And that's why I make his life so hard now. No, I didn't. But I had a nice time. And at the end of it, my dad said, in November, This was August, by the way, that's important. In November, I am going to Chiang Mai, Thailand, with my friend Tony, who I've been friends with since school. I've met Tony a couple of times in my life. He said, do you want to come? 8 days, 1,000 kilometers, about 15,000 meters of elevation. Tony's organised the whole tour. Do you want to see Thailand? And, oh my god, yeah, I was in. I was just in. So then, from August to November, my dad kept saying, you know, it's a leisurely tour, but you need to be in shape. So I was going out for a big ride on the weekend, and I was doing at least one Zwift in the evening, going over to my dad's house to use his Zwift setup because I didn't have one appropriate. And then I got into a bit of shape, and this is the only time I'll talk about numbers in this, is that my FTP was about 260 watts going into this Thailand tour, and I weighed about 72 kilos. 3.6 watts a kilo, decent shape, right? So that was it. Packing our bikes, getting on a 20-hour flight, and going to Thailand. The most I'd ever travelled before was to Denver or Boston for work, or to France for work, really. So, yeah, this was really something else. I will leave it there, because I've talked more than I intended to, but that's basically my history in bikes. I've mostly stuck to factual, but I hope it's apparent that bikes are a big part of my relationship with my parents, which I think is like a really valuable thing, actually. It's something I really appreciate about cycling. And in the next video that I release, which will be soon, I'll show you footage and go through what my dad and I got up to in 10 days in Thailand. Right?